Hello, and welcome back to We're Not So Different, a podcast about how we've always been idiots. My name is Luke Waters, and I'm an amateurish historian. And as always, I'm joined by Dr. Eleanor Ianaga, who is anything but. Today, we have an interview. So, no question this time. But as you know, we usually do questions here, and if you want to ask those or get access to ad-free versions of all these episodes, a bunch of bonus episodes as well, please subscribe, patreon.com/WNSDpod, $5 a month. It'll be fun. You make me smile when you do it. It makes me happy. So
you are his little heart, and
you get you get a nice little feeling in your heart whenever you do something like this. It's that extra I don't know, whatever. We'll call it a fringe benefit.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, on to the show. So on the heels of Eleanor's presentation at the American History Conference at the end of 2023. We did a couple of episodes earlier this month on proto-nationalism in the Middle Ages and how it wasn't really the same nationalism we see in the modern era, but our modern version does have roots in the medieval era. As we said at the time, we had a few guests lined up to come on and chat about nationalism from a few perspectives. And to prove we weren't lying, we're welcoming Dr. Bradley. Man, I really should have asked, is it Onishi or Onishi?
Onishi.
Onishi. Sorry about that. Dr. Bradley Onishi. See how professional I am.
That's
I
right.
Can't even remember
it's
to
a
ask things
well-oiled
before.
machine around here, bitch. How about
We're
that?
We're welcoming Dr. Bradley Onishi on the show today to talk about how medieval Christian proto-nationalism became modern Christian nationalism. By way of introduction, Brad is a modernist religious scholar whose study focuses on American religion, Christian nationalism, evangelicalism, and the intersection between them all. He's a professor at the University of San Francisco, the author of 2023's Preparing for War, The Extreme History of Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next, and is the co-host of the Straight White American Jesus podcast. Brad, welcome to the show. How the hell are you?
Good to be here, and this is a real treat. I early in my career was a fake medievalist, and I can explain what I mean by that. So,
is it the same thing? Is it the same thing that I mean? Because when I say fake medievalist, I just go. Somebody's like, "Well, how do you know that? You're not a historian." And I'm like, "Aha! I've got a scholar right here." I just point, and I'm just like, "Look, that's what she said. You take it up with her. She's got a degree. I don't know. Last time I took history, I got a D. Anyway, sorry.
Okay, now, Bradley, can you unpack that for me? What do you mean by fake medievalist?
Yeah. So a lot of my training was like in the history of Christian theology, and my dissertation was on modernist thinkers, many of them atheists and secular, who found in medieval mystics like deep resources for thinking through their philosophical projects, right? So so what this meant is I spent many years studying everyone from Gregory of Nyssa to the Pseudo-Dionysius to Meister Eckhart, Mechthild of Magdeburg, all of those folks, Trace of Avila. So there's just a lot of like the history of Christian mysticism in my training. So and that's what I mean by a fake medievalist. I am not somebody who can tell you the ins and outs of the Carolingians or like go through, what happened in this decade of the Holy Roman Empire, blah, 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 blah. But what for me is like deep in my bones is like, oh, Meister Eckhart's German sermons, or these kinds of things.
Oh, okay, so this is deeply relatable because, for a medievalist, we have to be like that, but about the classics.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm like that, but for Aristotle.
Yes.
Where I'm like, why do I know all this? This is really deeply frustrating, actually. I hate this fucking guy.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's good to see that it doesn't just happen to us. I'm glad that everyone has to do the same thing, basically. But like, I'm also like, fuck yeah, Pseudo-Dionysius. I'm just like, it activates me. That's my activation phrase. My eyes start glowing. Yeah.
Bernard of Clairvaux. There's like a lot of like reading Bernard of Clairvaux's Song of Songs, like
this fucking guy,
sermons, and then like talking to I used to teach classes about Origin of Alexandria and how like hey, if we want to talk about sex and gender, like, hey, Google origin of Alexandria. You're going to get some images, friends, that are not safe
Don't
for
do
work.
it at work.
So
Don't do
do
that
not
at
do it
work.
at work. Do not. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to do it now, but I can't do it because I'm at work.
Because you're at work. So that's it. That's it.
Yeah, well, that's cool. As a fellow, I guess, ex-evangelical, welcome. I don't have much more to add than that, but yeah. I think, you can add me to your list of modern day atheists who, just really think the Bogomils are neat. And so, I'm just like, they're just really neat.
Yeah, they are neat. Love a Bogomil, me.
I like them. They're fun. Yeah. I have like a special place in my heart for most of the heretical sects, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. Yeah. So, Brad, thank you for coming on the show. And before we get started with the questions and everything, just so we can all get on the same page here, what is your definition of modern Christian nationalism?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I feel like it might be a little basic for your audience because y'all have done so much to kind of really establish this in the kind of medieval and early modern period. But I will say that for me, when I think about contemporary Christian nationalism, so that could be in the United States, that could be in Bolsonaro's whole approach to his rule in Brazil, that could be Orban in Hungary, that could be some of the political impulses we see in Poland, wherever it may be. I see an idea that says we want to legitimate our nationalism by way of our Christian story, and that's true. I think we'll get into it today. That's there when it comes to medieval Christendom or divine right or whatever. In the United States, I'll just say that Christian nationalism is usually tied to this very basic idea: this is a Christian nation. The founders were Christians. They meant this to be a place that was built on moral principles inherited from the Bible. And so if we get away from that, we're getting away from our national identity, and therefore we can expect the nation to decline. It's a very flattened historical story that says United States, Christian nation. In the present, we've gone away from that. What is the proof of that? Well, sexual revolution, breakdown of the nuclear family, all kinds of things about queer folks, the ways that you can gay folks can get married, blah 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 blah. So what should we expect in the future? We should expect calamity. We should expect catastrophe unless we return to our Christian roots. I'll give you one very recent example of this. Is Senator Josh Hawley from the state of Missouri published in the journal First Things last week an essay called "Our Christian Nation." And he goes through, in almost laughable terms, the history that I just outlined. I mean, he basically says, yeah, sure, the founders were really into some Roman philosophies, and they might have been inspired by Enlightenment thinkers, but they were really founding the country on the Bible. Full stop. No footnote, no long division, just that's it. And then it's therefore, right, what's the takeaway? Unless we return to that, we will expect the nation to no longer exist. So I think that is American Christian nationalism in the contemporary scene as we see it play out. I'm happy to go into way more detail, but I think that's a kind of at least hopefully a framework to kind of start the conversation.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And, I think it's always good to kind of level set everything because we do talk a lot about this stuff on the show, and we've talked a lot about it from Crusades episodes and stuff like that. But we don't do stuff in timelines here for the most part.
Goddamn right.
We didn't start in 500 and go to 1500. So, sometimes it can be a little scattershot, and I think it's good to just, kind of remind people like that. So, but before I let you guys take it away, I just kind of had a question. Eleanor, can you discuss some specific roots of Christian nationalism that we've seen many times on the show? And then Brad, can you take those examples or take those roots and maybe give some examples of how they've become interwoven in the modern movement that you see today?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to start us off, it was so difficult, Brad. Like luckily I'm a very polite person and I know not to interrupt people because I was just like, oh my god, yes, and like getting hyped. And so I suppose that one kind of way that you can. Like a straight line that you can kind of shoot through to that idea is just to the idea of Christendom, quote unquote, which you can find, in the late antique period. You can certainly find it throughout the medieval period, right? Which is that one is defined by their religion. And so, there's no idea in the medieval period of a nation. And there's no idea of Europe, they're like, I mean, they know that like over there, they're like, oh yeah, that's Asia Minor, where the cow that Hera made because she cursed one of Zeus's lovers ran, and if you know your Io story, everybody, your Europa or whatever, like, so, they know that there are these varying places, right? I'm not saying that isn't true, but that's not how they define their world. Sorry. We'll let that guy go. But that's not how they define their world. They define their world in terms of there's Christendom and then there is not, right? And the nots can be a couple of different things. Now, you could be kind of one of the known troublemakers, which are Jewish people or Muslims, which makes you kind of like an apostate or something like that. So, people who should know better, right? You're on the right line, but you are steadfastly refusing the correct answer. And those relationships are very confusing and they kind of go back and forth. Sometimes, you can have a certain amount of chillness between it. Like, so I don't want to over-egg the conception of convivencia, like down in Spain or something like that. But, there are times when people can get along. And also, you find Christians in all sorts of places that are not Europe, right? Nestorian Christians end up all over Central Asia, for example. And, everyone's kind of like, oh, that's weird. Do you, right? But the point is that's kind of how medieval people sort their world out. It's like, well, you're here inside the bulwarks of Christendom or you're outside of them. And very much they then have this idea that flushes out to kind of everything else. Now, obviously the big example of this is the Holy Roman Empire, right? Because the Holy Roman Empire exists very expressly in order to do the violence that the church needs to do, but can't because it's the church. Right. So when Jesus was like, okay, take over the earth, here's the allegory of the two swords. He gives the sword of religion to the papacy and then the sword of political power to the emperors. And so if you need a crusade, well, the Pope knows you need to go take over the Holy Land. Duh, you need to kill some infidels, obviously. But the church can't do that because to do violence would be to undo all that and unmake all that. And, this is all well and good. This is cute. But then you run into issues with this, especially if you're just kind of like the king of a country. And, a lot of the times the way it's explained that you need kings is it's like, oh, well, who's going to protect everyone? And who's going to protect Christendom, right? And that's cute until you get something like, for example, the Vikings. And which is really instrumental in kind of bringing down the Carolingian Empire because people begin to lose faith in it. So it's like, well, wait, I thought that you said that you were God's representatives on earth and that you were running a holy empire. And yet there's a pagan in my backyard stealing my pig right now, And so you lose this kind of mythos, but it completely gets into exactly what Bradley was just saying, right? About how if you lose this kind of standard of Christendom, then it can also collapse. Everything can sort of collapse. And anything that goes wrong can be expressly linked to this degradation of Christianity.
Yeah.
Go ahead, brother. Sorry.
Yeah, so much here, and just so thankful for all of those like examples. I want to first start with this idea of Christendom because I think this plays on the psyche and in the imaginary of the contemporary Christian nationalists. What they imagine is we live in a Christian country, meaning as long as you are a Christian, right? And in this period, right? If we just fast forward to 2024, that could mean that you're a trad Catholic or you're a Catholic. I'm an Iowa evangelical who just voted for Trump for the third time. Over in California, there's a mega church. Down there in Texas, there's a huge group of Pentecostals, right? But we aren't going to agree on all the details, and there's going to be infighting, and there's going to be on TikTok, we're going to like go at each other, whatever. But I can at least imagine that you're all part of Christendom. Like January 5th, the day before January 6th, there was like this 5-hour Jericho rally, and you had Catholic priests, Pentecostal preachers, Alex Jones, megachurch preachers, all kinds of folks from various corners of what I would call the imagined American Christendom. If you're outside of that, you're scary. So this is why we often see a love for Israel, but a fear of or hatred towards actual Jewish people, because they're just not on board. Islamophobia is rampant. One of the things that I couldn't stop thinking about when you were talking, Eleanor, was Nikki Haley's comments on Palestinians, and a reporter saying, well, what should they do? And she's like, they should go to pro-Hamas countries, meaning like pro-Muslim countries, meaning that all Muslims are the same. They're all pro-Hamas. And I think the implication from Nikki Haley, not from me, was that they are all terrorists. And so whoever's in Palestine should just go to one of those places, because that's outside of Christendom. That's a non-Christian empire, so to speak, and they should just go there, whatever that is, whatever, Iran, whatever, wherever they want to go. So I think that's all part of it. The Vikings example is so poignant for me because it helps me think through, like, in the contemporary scene, if you have non-Christian ways of life that people see as viable and powerful, it destroys the whole mythos, as you said. So, like, if you show up and you're not Christian, and you're in my public schools, and you're a queer family, and you're happy, and you're nice, and you have good jobs, and you're raising great kids who are successful, and then you're palling around with a mixed race couple or a couple who are just immigrated, right? And all of a sudden everyone's like, I keep hearing how these folks are the devil, but they're like super nice. They're great. My kids love being here. Their lives are really flourishing. They invited us over for a barbecue on 4th of July. This is cool. Like, what am I supposed to be scared of again? Like, I don't, these are the pagans. These are the heathens that you told me would ruin my life and my country. So that is why, right, you see so much work to scare people out of schools, to make sure that, CRT and Moms for Liberty and all this stuff it makes it so that you think everyone's a groomer before they even show up to talk to you, right? Because they're the Vikings at the door who have a chance to show you that there's a good life. To go back to Aristotle, there's a good life outside of Christendom. And if people start to realize it, they might lose faith, as you said. And I think that's really interesting.
So you've hit on something here that I want to ask you a question about too. So you mentioned here kind of, the attacks on like a critical race theory and things like that, or, strange understandings of race, because I suppose one of the ways that I tend to read American Christian nationalism is expressly white. And am I wrong here, or like, how does this work?
So not wrong. And I think that a lot of the MAGA movement, I think a lot of the main players, and here's where I think we need to be clear. A lot of the billions and billions and billions of dollars that fund these efforts come from old guard religious right white Christian nationalists. So, if some of you are old enough to remember, or you just know these histories of the Jerry Falwells, the Pat Robertsons, the Billy Grahams, the Tim LaHaye's of Left Behind and all in the John Birch Society.
Oh yeah, Left Behind. God, I hadn't thought about that in a while. Sorry.
Those families and those networks are white networks, and they're the ones that are going to bring in the DeVosses, right? The billionaires. They're the ones that are going to be cozy enough with the Koch brothers to kind of get some of that cash. However, there are Christian nationalists in this country who are people of color, and a lot of the growth in that sector is from Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity.
Okay.
That is where you'll find churches that have Korean Americans, right? Latinx folks. And those churches are some of the most, unfortunately, avant-garde, pro-Trump, pro-violence churches in the country. They are totally on board with the idea that the nation's been stolen. They need to get it back, even if it's a kind of violent way to do it. So it's as always, we're scholars. It's complicated. There's nuance. We could write 10 articles saying, hey, here's how this all should be broken down. But I think the short story is a lot of the money and power are still white Christian nationalists. they're still a lot of the face of the thing. But there are people of color out there who are participating in ways that are actually really, really important to notice.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because, I grew up in a really big Korean American community, like just absolutely massive. Like on my block that I grew up on, there's a Korean church, and that it's one of these things that's kind of around. And I went to school because I went to a Catholic school with a lot of Korean kids as well. Some of whom were Catholic and some of whom were not. But it was just kind of like understood that this was kind of a big part of the culture was going to a Christian school. And then, of course, a part of that, too, was I had a lot of Filipino kids in my class as well, because West Coast, baby! Yeah. So it was just like, a lot of Asians, a lot of, Latino people and that kind of thing. And which was really cool. But, it was kind of within this very more like chilled out Catholic understanding, and it was just kind of like old school, like nothing interesting Catholic school. And then I remember kind of getting to the Catholic's high school, right? Because it was like there's this number of smaller Catholic elementary schools that I grew up in, and then you went to the Catholic high school, and the Catholic high school was much bigger. All the Catholic elementary schools fed into it, but so did the Christian schools.
Interesting.
Because the Christian schools oftentimes didn't have enough teenagers to support them. And so suddenly there'd be like evangelical kids around, and we'd be like, oh, wow, that's spicy. And like, there would be certain things that like you could do like the handshake meme about. And it was the 90s. So, I was constantly getting in fights with everyone in high school because everyone was always being homophobic. And I was like, why don't we not do that? Kind of a thing. But it was like completely acceptable at the time to just do things like that. Or, there would be abortion things. Yeah. But like, for example, there was this one kid I knew who believed that dinosaur bones were put in the ground to fool you. And Catholics were like, well, no. And so there were these
you only knew one of those people, huh? Interesting.
I mean, like, there's probably more. I just didn't talk to him,
Probably.
So, yeah.
That's so sweet. That's so adorable. I think I probably knew one Catholic until I was like 25, maybe.
Yeah, like
one or two. Like
I'm not sure. Like, I mean, Catholics aren't as a big a section of society in Washington as they are for like where my parents are both from Chicago, and hey baby, would you like to see some Catholics? Because I could show them to you. But we weren't weird. Like, it wasn't weird to have Catholics around the shop in Seattle. Whereas I do understand that if you go to other places in America, it does become strange. So
For sure.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that has changed with those, like if you mentioned that, like those Korean American Christians, right? I think there's a sense where there's a lot of wrestling in those churches today with issues related to affirming LGBTQ folks, et cetera. But I also think that the pandemic and the Trump years kind of forced a little bit of a political reckoning. And there is a situation where they've had to sort of say, hey, we are Christian, and a lot of us have conservative political views, but we're being told to go back to China every time we leave the house because of the pandemic and because of Trump. And what Trump is saying about immigrants, et cetera, doesn't really fit into our story. So like Catherine Jin Lum's book, the Stanford historian, really like clues you into how you can be a Christian heathen, right? Like you can be a Korean American who is as conservative theologically as your evangelical neighbor down the street, the white guy, and yet they may never see you as part of their American Christendom because of your the phenotype of your skin or your you know what I mean? And so so some of those folks have chosen to go all in and say, no, we're on MAGA. Let's do it. But a lot of them have sort of, there's been a forced reckoning of like, where do we fall and where are we going to align ourselves politically in this moment because of all those factors,
And see, that's interesting because it does remind me of the sort of like the mess you get in sort of early modern, late medieval Europe, right? When you start coming up with varying flavors of Christianity. And, of course, when we first invent varying flavors of Christianity, it does kind of fall down on nationalistic lines, right? So, like, at least, like, within, I'm not saying, of course, the Orthodox have always been there, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm not, shout out again to Nestorians, Love you guys. Keep it up. But, so when the Hussites were the first and best to ever do it, for example, right? Like this is a Czech thing for Czechs, right? And, that like, and it's one of the things that I like about it, because I'm like, yeah, that's right, bitch. No one knows what we're doing. Woo, and I simply love to read a Czech text and get hyped. But there is very much, like granted that's a kind of a reaction to what they see as like Germans coming over here and telling them what to do and how they don't like that. But it can also very quickly turn into, and only Czechs get to be saved in this kind of particularized way, which, some people kind of reacted to and took to that level. And then certainly when we look at the birth of Lutheranism, there's all of these things where they expressly talk about Germanness. Or it's like, and their idea of Germanness being like, well, do you speak German? Not like our idea of it. But, I was just reading this really great new biography of Thomas Müntzer the other week for the Verso podcast, actually. So everyone check that out when it comes out. I'll let you know. But I was struck how over and over again they would be like, German Christians, Germans were Germans. And granted, again, part of that is in reaction to what they see as this like Italian overreach, right? Where they are very much equating Rome with this form of Christianity. And to be fair, it's because specifically the dudes in Rome were like, we pay for my church. I want a new church. Can you give me money? Right. So, but it comes up out of that. So you see these things and these very express kind of desires to say, well, the real expression of Germanness, and like, oh, it's not the Holy Roman Empire, which has turned into this mess of things. And, oh, I don't know, he's hanging out with Spanish people now. Could he even really, protect our interests? So that's there. But I find it quite interesting how in the American context you can put all that in a bag and kind of shake it up, right?
It is interesting. And I think two comments. I think this is so fun. It's so fun. I don't get to talk about Jan Hus ever. Come on. This is like so fun.
Oh, that's so sad.
I'm now imagining a shirt that says like, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself, Jan Hus. And then, anyway, we can talk about.
He didn't want to. He didn't want to check himself. That was the thing.
He wrecked himself so he could check himself.
No, but I think the shirt is coming from the perspective of like the church. They're like, hey, you better check yourself, CZECH, before you wreck yourself, Jan. And Jan was like, nah, I'm not going to check myself. So
no thanks.
No.
Give it your best. All right. Sorry. I'm just like having a lot of fun thinking about Jan Hus.
Yeah, that's right. Correct.
It's really hard. It's really hard when your partner's not like a medievalist or a scholar of this stuff to go to the Czech Republic and be like, do you want to go visit Jan Hus's church or like the Hussite church?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, is it like a beautiful cathedral? It's like, no, not really. It's really plain. Not much to see.
Yeah, no.
And you're like, but we should go because it's super important. And they're like, well, okay, maybe, anyway.
Yeah.
I may or may not have had that experience. Okay. So,
shout out to the Bethlehem Chapel. We love it.
I just think internally we're at this weird place where the Christian nationalists are sort of willing, in many cases, not all, and I think we talked about this on the panel that we were on, to be in a kind of loose alliance. Abortion can be a uniter. Immigration can be a uniter. The idea of the Christian nation can be a uniter among the conservative white Catholic, the Pentecostal in the Southwest of the United States, the megachurch person, the Michael Flynn follower, whoever. But what it made me think also, Eleanor, was the ways that Christian nationalists imagine nations operating now. Like they love the idea that Orban has Hungarian Christianity and that he's going to do Christianity for his people. According to their history, they're going to speak their language. They're going to have a pure-blooded Hungarian Christianity. Get these immigrants out of here. Get the migrants from Northern Africa or from Muslim countries, and they don't get to be here. They love that vision. They think that's so cool. So it's not that they're like, hey, eventually American Christians will sort of take over that satellite. It's like, no, we want a world where American Christians are isolated in their kind of little nation where they do it their way. Putin and the Russians do their thing in their orthodox way, but it's still Christian nationalist. It's still sort of isolationist. It's still one in which you don't see a kind of cosmopolitan mixing of cultures or whatever. Orban's doing it. Poland was doing it up until a little while ago. Bolsonaro had it grooving. So I guess that sort of like that idea of, for example, we're Orban, we're a small country in Hungary, couple million people. We're going to do Hungarian Christianity, right? In the way that you talked about the Czechs doing it. And yet it can turn into, and it clearly was from the beginning with Orban, something really insidious, something really harmful, something really xenophobic, something really nationalist in terms of an identitarian kind of, violent movement, non-democratic for sure. So anyway, I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but those were kind of some of the things that were happening in my brain as you were talking about the ways that the Czechs or the Germans would sort of think about their identity and their Christian identity in specific as related to their ethnicity or to what might be Germany or, what we now call, the Czech Republic, or it's so on and so forth.
Yeah, I was in Poland the other year, and I saw like the perfect example of this on a poster on a door of the cathedral, right? And they had this big poster, and granted, it's on the door of the cathedral, so what do I expect, really? But like, I swear to you, they had this big poster on it that said, "We are Polish, we are Catholic, we do not abort."
Yeah,
and there's like like someone and like a baby or something like that, and I was like, huh. Okay. And I found that very interesting, especially I'm like, homie, abortion is not legal in this country. Like, who are you talking to? Like, why do you need to say that? We're fucking clear on that. And it's not great and contributes to rather a lot of death among women. But it was like this desire to still kind of state this plainly. And the posters that I first saw were in Polish, but then they had them as well in English, like just in case. Just so you know, like we're just underlining what this means and what our understanding of Polishness is inextricably linked to being forced birth.
I mean, I think in America, at least, I think one of the things you could point to is the fact that just like everything keeps getting, at some point there are so many contradictions. And it's so taxing on the human brain to try and like parse them out that what's one more? What's one more what's one more contradiction on top of it? Like it's like people who vote against their interests. They do it for like many reasons. It could be economic, it could be something social that's happening to them or something like that, but like you just do it, and people have been doing that for years. And like now with kind of boiling down like capitalism, and you have like Christianity as like an overarching thing, not Christendom, but just Christianity generally, is such a wide-ranging thing that goes from like Catholics, Tradcaths, Orthodox, Anglican, every version of Protestant, like the million versions of Protestantism that wrap all the way back around to being like versions of Catholicism themselves. And it's just like when you have all that and all of the political stuff gets turned into it and you kind of glom it together, then like some of the stuff people just kind of are like, well, I can look past that one thing because I've been looking past all of these other things to do this anyway. I have to look past the fact that like, Trump is this obvious grifter or whatever, and you just easily, at some point you start easily looking past that. And like, once you do that and you look past the verses in the Bible that you supposedly believe in, especially if you're, Protestant, you skip past the verses about, kindness to your neighbor and the jumping through the rich people jumping through the eyes of needles and all that. It's like, once you have all those contradictions, what's one more? Even if it is kind of obvious from the outset, that's what it kind of seems like to me. But yeah.
I think too, and this is where we might circle back, and I'm wondering what you think, Eleanor, about this in terms of that early modern period, the sort of decades before, or the lead up to the Reformation and everything that happens in Europe in the 1500s. But, going off what you're saying, Luke, I think there's so many in this country right now who feel uncertainty and change and fear. And so why am I able to get past those contradictions? Why am I able to kind of live in a worldview that is just full of like internal, battles in terms of like things not making sense? And I think part of it is just the world is changing so much. I'm so scared. I am so uncertain. I don't know what to do. So I'm going to hold on to some like really foundational principles about faith and family and history and nation. And that is all going to be able to be like pulled apart by Mr. Smarty Pants book guy over here who wants to like do the theology and the political science and show me how like I'm voting against what I really should be because I want these tax cuts, or I want to like, gut the social safety net and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really about impulse, instinct. And this is where Trump was just an absolute nefarious, dark genius to like just dig into people's fears and uncertainty and say, your world doesn't make sense anyway. So just hold on to a strong man, hold on to an idea of Christian family and stories, and just go, because the world is just terrifying. What else are you going to do? And I think that gets us a lot of the way in this whole conversation about like modern Christian nationalism. But I'm wondering too, Eleanor, if like you think there's resonances there with the ways that Europe sort of, you said, as new iterations of Christianity get invented, things get spicy, but you end up with nationalist identities, or proto-nationalist identities, I probably should say, with, Germany, the Czechs and so on.
Yeah, no, I think that you're bang on there. And it's interesting because I suppose around the same time too, we first get this idea of being Spanish, right? Which is also happening at the same time. So, Ferdinand and Isabella, famously they glom together every single little province out on the Iberian Peninsula, and they say, Spain. And they're like, and guess what that means? It's time to Inquisition the fuck out of everybody. And it is a really that's an interesting one, because I do think, it's certainly proto-nationalist, but it's also, I think, one of the first modern knee-jerk Christian nationalist things that we ever see, right? Because they do make up this brand new idea of a nation state. They do make up this idea of, well, there is a shared culture and history there. And the thing that we have to do is we have to get rid of the Moriscos and the Judíos. They've got to go, and they've got to go. And it's like, well, granted, they haven't been there for very much longer than Christians. I will give it to you. The Visigoths were there first. Shout out. But, Muslims had been around for quite some time on the Iberian Peninsula, and they have just as much claim to, some vague form of, Iberianness at the very least. They're certainly Granadan. They're certainly whatever. And I think that this is a really kind of important thing to talk about, because I think a lot of the time now, when people talk about the Spanish Inquisition, they talk about it as something that the church did, which is kind of like due to our own kind of like Protestant myth making about how the church is very bad. And granted, shout out, the church is very bad. Like that's not what I'm saying. But, the church was basically like, you're going to do what? Okay, have fun. And that was basically, the response from the Catholic side. They weren't going to do it, but the Spanish crown was ready to say, okay, we're defining what life is like within our borders, and it specifically is linked to, torturing people until they become the way that we want them to be, enslaving them en masse, taking all of their things and kicking them out. And so I guess that it's a really kind of clear cut example. And the thing that's really scary is, you see, I think certainly, we saw Bolsonaro make reference to it at a point in time and been like, and that was really great. And you're like, Jesus Christ, really worrisome. But, especially, I guess within this kind of Latin American context, there is this kind of understanding that, well, yeah, that was also happening in Portugal. Portugal was not separate from Spain at the time. And so they do kind of have that in there. And there is this ability, this sort of canny ability on the part of Christian nationalists now to kind of reach back and find things like that and scoop them out. And now Spain is an extreme example. I would certainly say that. But, hell, England did it. That's a really interesting one because, again, the way that the historiography works, everyone always talks about Bloody Mary, who, like, I'm not here to justify Queen Mary's, killing of Protestants, but Elizabeth I killed way more Catholics than Mary ever killed Protestants, but nobody talks about that. Everyone just goes, oh, isn't it great? Wow, she really knew what it meant to be English, or whatever. And there are these kind of stories that we tell about these things. And I think that within the European context, I mean, they're still like nuts, right? It's absolutely ridiculous to celebrate any of these horrors, right? And say, yeah, and I would like some of that. But I guess at least they fucking make sense, right? Like at least if you want to be some real jerk right-wing Spanish guy, I'm like, yeah, I mean, it was in there at a point. I mean, you have to ignore the medieval period in order to get that, but I'm not saying you haven't done it before. And it just, when Americans do it, I'm like, what? It's just such a weird bag, I guess. But yeah.
I think this comes back to the discussion about, are we really talking about white Christian nationalism, or are there Christian nationalists who are black, who are people of color, who are Asian American, whatever? And I always want to be like cognizant of like, there are folks who are in this mix who are various, racial identities, various ethnic identities, and obviously various Christian identities, right? Could be Catholic, could be Lutheran, could be Pentecostal. There's a bunch of Orthodox here to talk about too, like a bunch, right?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, like it gets real wild real quick.
Oh man. Yeah. Sarah Riccardi Swartz, shout out to your work, because, there are just Orthodox folks in Appalachia that will just tell you to your face, I'm a fascist, right? But, with all of that said, there are a ton of Christian nationalists in this country who are white, and if they had their way, would kind of say, I'd really love if we could just gather in white European heritage communities of Christians in ways that are pure and free of any otherness. Like they don't want the 10 Korean families coming in, even if they're all in on Donald Trump, right? They want to gather in a small town in Montana or Idaho or Utah and just like have their little society that they think is Christendom, that they think is what happens when, right, you get the Spain you talked about, or what happens when, you get something along the lines of a kind of just pure society. And so I'm always wanting to say, yes, there's Christian nationalists of color in this country. And it's a weird bag because we have all these Catholics and all these Protestants and all these evangelicals. But don't get me wrong, we could spend the next 4 hours and I can show you all the terrible websites and all the terrible places where a lot of those like Protestant whites want to just get together with only Protestant, like a lot of them are Reformed. And, they want to build like Calvin's Geneva in Idaho and make sure that there are no Catholics, Koreans, Muslims, none of that. And so that's all there too. So it is a weird bag. I guess I'm just trying to say we have that here. We have like a lot of folks who want that like pure American white nation,
Yeah, I think that is, I think that's one of those. People talk about all of the divisions on the left and all of the things that have to be resolved or whatever, one way or the other. And I mean, I think that is a something that has to be resolved within that movement because, there are definitely Christian nationalists who are people of color, Christian nationalist churches like that. But I mean, I think a much larger majority of them would be Christian nationalists who, just want the whole white thing. So, that is, it's not gonna go great, for some of them. So, but I think it's just one of the it's one of those giant contradictions that's staring everyone in the face now is like societal norms and everything breaks down, and it'll, like everything else, once the contradictions mount too much, it'll come to a head, and then sorry. That was depressing.
if we go
just wandered into depression territory.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I'm wondering, Eleanor, if we go back to Spain and like, is there any room here to connect, what we're talking about with North America and in terms of this country's history, et cetera, with the doctrine of discovery? Or like, is there a way to say, hey, that's a place where we might actually have a historical link to what we're talking about, what I'm talking about in terms of contemporary Christian nationalism, and what you're pointing us to in terms of, pre-modern medieval iterations of Christian nationalism. And maybe not. Maybe there's like no reason to even bring it up, and it's totally a moot point,
I think that you really kind of have to, right? Because I think one of the ways you get especially the kind of new world forms of Christian nationalism, I mean, it's expressly colonial, right? Because, when we are seeing Europeans first kind of set out in boats to other places, the Christianity provides this really useful cover for all of the atrocities, right? So it's like in the first place, when we start getting the kind of the African trade, where everyone started chattel slaving everyone down in Africa really quickly. This is expressly linked to concepts of Christianity, right? And say it's okay that you're enslaving these guys because they're pagans? ? And what you got to do is baptize them, and it's better for you to have them be enslaved and have them be baptized because you saved their soul, right? And the same thing then goes for Native Americans when everybody kind of shows up over in America. That is kind of like part and parcel of it. Sort of like, how do you explain why you're massacring all these people? Well, I have to, because they aren't Christian, and and that kind of harkens back to older ideas about, Christendom versus the world. And certainly we see a lot in the medieval period of enslaving people back and forth on either side of the Christian and Muslim in particular divide. Because, you see a lot of Christians enslaving each other. Let's be brutally honest. Right? Like up until the high medieval period, there is just a lot of going over there and just enslaving anyone you want. And then eventually when Catholicism kind of gets into a little bit more of a flow and becomes a legal structure, they decide that's a bad look. It's like, probably shouldn't be enslaving other Christians. But who you can enslave? Jewish people, Muslim people, whoever. Like, go for it. Go for your life, because they're not really people, And so there's kind of a lot of fighting back and forth about that. And so then you kind of have that baked in, I would say, like in terms of when Europeans go out in terms of the more colonial expression of things. Because it's like, who are the first people who show up a lot of time? It's hell, in Japan, the word for bread is pan, because the Portuguese showed up and were like, hey, you want Catholic? Hey, Catholics. Hey, you like that? Like that's something that's available. So, they send those guys out. Certainly the Dutch do rather a lot of that. And I mean, definitely, especially even in like the later periods of colonialism, like when you get down to like Australasia and Oceania, there's still this real drive to Christianize people, like especially the way that Europeans feel directly confronted by the fact that the Pacific Islanders are just fucking, and they're like, oh God, oh no, and like we've got to come in here and save them. You need to put some clothes on and get a job and stop eating that pineapple and having sex. And it's like, way to ruin everybody's life,
Got the surfing out too.
I know. It's like, no greater crime was perpetrated against anyone, I would say, than what white people did to Oceania, because they had it down. That was the life, There was a lot of warfare in there. I'm not saying that I don't understand that, but I would say that this kind of Christianizing mission certainly holds out around all of that, and then it kind of gets warped around into whatever it is you want. And then, it also creates in-groups and out-groups in various places. There's a real reason why a lot of Koreans are Christian, and these things are all linked to that, certainly. And you can take that to kind of medieval ideas about how the world needs to be organized. I would certainly say that.
Yeah, I think for me, what you said at the start here about the category of heathen, or being outside of Christendom, it really to me, that's a line that I can see in 2024. I can see it in 1824. Like I could, we could take this conversation so many places in this country. We could talk about Chinese exclusion.
Oh God, yeah.
On the West Coast, and talk about how, and Catherine Jinlum's book really does this so perfectly, how that's a matter of like, you're Chinese, you're never going to not be a heathen. So you just got to go. Like you can tell me you believe in Jesus if you want, but I'm not sure I'm going to believe you. And you're just too different. So you got to go. And right. So there's a sense of, if you're heathen, you're not a real person, and you're certainly never going to be a real part of our group. And I think that then we can go further back and say, well, how do you justify like attempted genocide with indigenous folks in North America? Well, you can say, well, they're just outside of Christendom. Like, we're allowed to conquer this land. We're allowed to take it because they're not Christian people, and they're not actually, like, in our mind, really people, and then, we can talk about, going even further back. So I think for me, the doctrine of discovery just rolls into this general idea of, within Christendom, there's a certain category. Outside of Christendom, Jew, Muslim, or even worse, heathen, sorry, you're out of luck. We're going to kind of do what we want. We're going to treat you inhumanely, and we're not going to feel like Jesus is mad at us for doing that, because that's what he kind of wants. You know what I mean?
Oh God, yeah. Like, I mean, I think about this a lot in terms of like Australia, right? Because so when the British people showed up to Australia, they said it was a terra nullius. It's no man's land. There's no people here, and it's like, well, yeah, because and of course that's patently ridiculous on its head, because it was full of Aboriginal people who they then proceeded to massacre. But the point is, they didn't think they were people. They're like, that's not a people. Like, they don't even have farms. What they found out how to live on this incredibly hostile continent in a way that won't mean that like everybody dies when there's forest fires, or think, what? No, that's disgusting. Start living like white people in a place that is not designed for it immediately, and some stupid decisions were made in Australia. But it's interesting because Australian nationalism, which there is a lot of, let's just say, just to put it mildly, doesn't end up being like particularly Christian. There's this weird thing in Australia where they will talk about, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm Christian. Like, oh yeah, I'm C of E. Like they'll all say they're C of E, and I'll be like, when's the last time you went to church? Never. Not baptized, not nothing. Like, no sir, they don't fucking go to church, right? But they will still reflexively be like, yeah, no, I'm Church of England because I'm Australian. And now, granted, Australia is also the home of Hillsong.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yep.
Yeah, okay. My husband grew up very close to where Hillsong started, and I will never forget, drilled into my brain, there was this big, on the M2, right by his parents' house, there was this huge billboard when I lived there that had like a teenage girl just like caked in makeup, and the billboard just said, "Smile, princess, Jesus loves you," and then Hillsong on it. And I was like, I'm going to kill everyone in the world. This is just, and granted, they are real nationalists, but they don't tend to, like, they will do nationalist things within this Christian context, but they don't tend to push that, because if you tell an Australian they're going to have to go to church on a Sunday instead of the beach, they're going to be pissed, like they've got to make that decision on their own,
I also think this is one of, like, Hillsong is really interesting because in this moment, I mean, Hillsong has sort of gone globally down the tube for there's been scandal, there's been a lot of issues. But
probably from all the sex crimes.
Well, a lot of sex criming, and that'll often, not all the time, we should say, but anyway, Hillsong is sort of out of vogue, at least in some sense, and I think some of it, not all of it, and please don't email me. I know this is not all of it, but
do not email me ever.
You can. I'm not going to respond. Like if I know that Hillsong has had a whole. There's been documentaries. There's been books. I know that Hillsong was supposed to be a global mega church movement. It was not supposed to be, we are Australian Christian nationalists. Hillsong was never going to be the vanguard of American Christian nationalism. It was about being hot, pretty Christians who went to hot, trendy churches and hung out with Justin Bieber and looked good in Manhattan doing it. And I think right now in this moment, in a way that is really unfortunate, the avant-garde, the like thing people are sort of trending toward is more, I want the church that's going to tell me how to make America great again. I want the church that's going to remake Christendom in the United States, rather than just, wow, everyone at the church is super hot. There's lasers and somehow the rock band is amazing. Like that's still there. Don't get me wrong, y'all, but I'm just, it was never going to be the sort of 2020s hottest church trend because of the rampant nationalism and xenophobia we're seeing in our country right now. So
that's really interesting. Okay, yeah, because so it's like they're kind of, their star has dulled because they're not doing the right kind.
Well, like if you go back to like when I grew up in the 90s, right? So like in the 90s, if you show up in wherever America or Sydney or Melbourne or you know, could be a lot of places around the world, and you're like, look at this church, everyone's hot.
Yeah.
The rock band is killing it. We have lasers. We have lattes. That was like, whoa, okay, this is the thing.
Yeah.
This is the way to like rebuild Christianity in the country. Now, if you want to see the churches that are growing, and like they went from 2018, they had 150 people, and 2024, they've got 1,500 people. What are they doing? Is it lasers and hot people? Nah, it's QAnon, conspiracy theories, great replacement theory. It is go protect the border. It is, I can't believe you took the vaccine because now you're full of metals that will kill you. Like those churches are the ones that are like, we've seen 1,000% growth in a year. It's not the church that's like, look, all the young hot people are here and we have lasers. You know, come on, hang out.
I wonder if that's just kind of like a function of the general degradation of our society and how shit everything is, you know?
Oh,
but
it is. It is.
Yeah. That's depressing. Woo!
Yay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep
Thanks
it.
for inviting me. I'm I'm good at parties. This is why people want me around.
I think as church attendance decreases generally across at least Europe and America, I think it you know, the only ones you are going to see that have growth are going to be the ones that are your most like hardcore, because the ones that aren't seen as hardcore, the ones that are, you know, maybe seen as just more like, you know, come hang out, we accept everyone, you know, that's just kind of like, you know, yeah, you come if you want or whatever, but when you get the hardcore ones and they're like, we're right, everyone else is wrong, everyone else is going to hell, you know, you kind of have this framework, this rubric to start like, you know, us versus them even more. And you get to the point where you could be like, look, I don't care what else is going on in the world. We are doing this right, you know, here in this, you know, thing. And then you just get people, you suck gullible, sad, and people who have just had like a bunch of terrible material circumstances fall on them. You suck all those people in, and you know, people are groping for anything because the social safety nets in America have been removed, and you know, belief in legitimacy of government falling apart and all that. So people just grasp for anything, and you know, that's there.
I think that's a big thing. You know, we can talk about the Australian context or Europe at the moment, but like in the United States, if you live in a lot of this country, you have no social safety. Like you don't have a place where you can like afford daycare, right? You don't have a place where you can plug your family into some like kids programs. You don't have a place where like, you know how to meet people and like, oh, there's a basketball league or there's like a mom's group for people who have like a 6-month-old. I need that because I am alone at home and I am my mental health is really not good. So like there's just so little social safety net that Luke, I think that's so spot on. Like if you want to connect, you want somebody that'll help you when you're sick, you want like you just moved to the town and they're going to like invite you to the kid's birthday party, or they're going to make sure that you have a place to go to watch the Super Bowl. Hey, come on over, because we don't have healthcare here. We don't have like a place where like you can take your kid to the daycare and it's like $80 a month, you know, as it is in Germany, right? Like we don't have a place where you can feel like without church, I will be socially like not in complete vulnerability and danger, you know? And so I do think there is something to that.
Yeah. Well.
I just think that I've talked about it a little on here on the show before. I just think that like, as capitalism, the monetary aspects of capitalism have infected everything, and they've infected, Christianity, and it was infected with money long before long before capitalism came along, as we all know. But like when you have this stuff and people's lives keep getting miserable and more miserable and more miserable, and you can like bring them in with like this prosperity gospel idea and stuff like that, and like it's not true. That's not what the Bible actually says about a lot of things. But when people are going into the gutter, not metaphorically, but literally having, living on the street or getting close to it or something like that, they're going to look for anything. And if you can marry that, like, come hang out with us, we'll all work together and it'll be a little bit better. And then you can marry that with the fact that also this is the fault of non-Christians, is the fault of atheists, Jews, Muslims, communists, whoever the hell it is, insert other here. And then, and then you just entrap people more in the cycle of, reactionary insulating themselves with reactionary ideas. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. I mean, and I think that you definitely see that on display, a bit in the European context, in places like Hungary. Like that's part
Yes.
of like in
Yes.
what is in the mix.
Yes.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's an interesting one because that's a place where Australia falls down, right? Because like they still have money, the fuckers. So like, that kind of thing. Although their healthcare is a bit more expensive than say here in England, but what are you gonna do? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll just say, like, I know we need to, I know we're kind of winding here in our conversation, but I'll just say, like, I'm at a place where I have a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old. And the challenges of that in the United States where, like, we're both working, getting childcare, right? The amount of times, Lucan, as an ex-evangelical, I've thought, it'd be really nice if I was still in the church. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
You know
okay,
why?
Yeah.
Because, like, I could just run them over there, like, and there would be places, like there would be people that would watch my 4-month-old for me while I worked for a couple hours. There would be a program for my 2-year-old that was like on the weekends that they could plug into that would be free, and they'd meet other kids and they'd have fun and I wouldn't have to worry about them. There'd probably be like a parent group that my wife or I could go to, and we could be like, hey, it's really hard having a 4-month-old and a 2-year-old. I never sleep and I'm trying to like carry on my career and like balance our budget, and we're worried, and could be any number of things, right? Summer camp, or just going to breakfast with other parents or dads or whoever's and talking about how you're just not sure you're doing it right. The amount of times I wish I still had that, even though I'm like, I would never go back to that because I don't believe any of it and it's toxic and there's so many things. I think points to what you're talking about there with people get plugged into a church because it's so helpful for them socially and mentally and psychologically, but you have to be willing to accept the list of goodies that comes with it, right? Like, the patriarchy, the xenophobia, right? The nationalism, the whatever else. And a lot of folks don't really realize they're getting that bucket of goodies until they're a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years into it. And maybe they don't care. Maybe it doesn't bother them. Maybe it's just all worth it. Maybe it's all just like, this is worth be plugged into something that makes my life better and makes my life meaningful. And so, yeah, I'm in. Let's go yell at people at Planned Parenthood because that's what God would want. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
God loves that shit. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you've been robbed of every social and communal outlet that you can possibly think of, and now you are it's reduced down to this, and it's like, you could do that, but like, you disagree with so much of what they say, and all of the just abhorrent social aspects and everything, and you have to make that decision, and like there is obviously a right choice there, but it is hard. I get why it is hard for people, because like going from when I left, I lost most of my friends,
Exactly.
like most of them. Like I really only have a couple of long-term friends left in the world. Like, and like, you know, that was a choice I made. It was something I kind of knew that was going to happen. But like, you know, people should, like, I mean, you know, just speaking generally, people shouldn't have to do that. And like, you know, like, it speaks to just like how far we've gone down that like people are like, well, should I continue in this church that's talking about like, you know, how evil trans people are, how evil Chinese people are, or how evil the predominantly black congregation of co-religionists down the road is, or whatever, or should I flee? And the correct answer obviously is you should flee, but that's really fucking hard for people to do, especially like in your 40s or 50s or whatever, because like it's even worse than, like, I did it when I was in my very early 20s, like when you're like that old, and it's just like,
reimagining a new life. That's really hard. It's really hard.
Well, Brad, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about this horrific topic with us. But we're glad we could have you on to talk about, you know, how these two things come together: the medieval proto-nationalism and the modern Christian nationalist version of it. And it's thank you. Please plug your stuff. Plug what you got.
Yes.
Well, we do Straight White American Jesus 3 times a week. We don't think Jesus was straight, white, or American. Don't worry. But we just try to dissect all of the contemporary Christian nationalism and religious right and everything related to that. So check that out. Book is Preparing for War, The Extremist History of White Christian Nationalism and What Comes Next. So that's been out about a year, and paperback is coming. So can check that out. Yeah. And those are the big things. We have a kind of emerging podcast network called Axis Mundi Media, and that's research-based podcasts made by scholars. And we want to kind of bring the ivory tower to the grassroots. And so we have about 8 shows on there, and you can check that out at axismundi.us.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming. Eleanor, what do you have going on right now?
You wouldn't believe it, but I did 2 blog posts this month. So, you know, check the blog, going-medieval.com. Your girl's writing for you. Of course, the paperback of The Wenches and Future Sex is now out in the United States. So if you haven't read it yet, now you're just hurting my feelings. You're doing it on purpose. So do that. Otherwise, you can find me on the socials at Going Medieval, or on Insta at Dr. Eleanor Yanaga. Thank you.
You can find me, Luke is Amazing, on whatever social media, and you can find my old show, People's History of the Old Republic, wherever you listen to this. But that's going to do it from us today. We will see you next time. But until then, thanks for listening.
Bye.